Alright, good evening everybody. Look in the description. So, there I am, do my usual pointing and browsing, and I come across this article about an immigrant who overstayed his visa for 7 years. And, I'm sure a lot of people on the left are going to, say, he wasn't, harming anybody or whatever, and that very well could be true. And obviously, it's just a sad state of affairs when we have to fucking, rely on undocumented immigrants, for certain things. But that's a whole nother topic in of itself. What this ties in to is if you're in a country that you're not a citizen of, and you came here legally at some point, meaning with this article, he came here legally, he had a visa, and he just overstayed it. Like, what the fuck? That should have been the forefront, of his mind, to make sure that he was up to date on all of his documents. He should have applied for a green card at some point, and then, eventually citizenship, if that was his goal. But, so he's, detained by ICE. And, again, this is like a slippery slope. Like, what is going on with these people? That they're just not staying up to date with their documentation. Now, again, in all fairness, I think, the so-called ICE, which I don't care what he says, I don't think they're actual ICE agents. Maybe sometimes they are, but, the ones that you hear about fucking doing, wellness checks and all that, I think those are just mercenaries, hired by Trump to, pose as ICE. But, this is actually the correct way. What this is saying is that because he's detained, and of course we're offering $1,000 and a free flight to self-deport now. Yeah, I'd take the fucking money. But anyhow, so what this is saying is contradictory to what you hear about in the media, where they instantly, deport people. I know I mentioned this about a Mexican boxer who was deported because, I guess he had a criminal record. And, like, what's really going on? Like, if you're here legally, fine. But, this one, they're saying that he has a hearing, he's not being sent to El Salvador. But obviously, Trump is just going hardcore with this whole remove millions of immigrants without legal status as part of, mass deportation policy. Is considered to be a criminal. Last time I checked, it was a misdemeanor. Let's see what this actually says. U.S. detained by ICE. Alright, so I guess that's a different one. Alright. So, we'll leave that alone. That's just a case where they're actually getting, the so-called, according to this article anyways, they're getting the so-called due process. They're detained, they have a hearing. But he had 7 years to fucking straighten that shit out. And, again, if you're emigrating to, a country, and this also applies to, Americans who want to flee the U.S., you have to keep your fucking documentation at the forefront of your priorities. Let's say I decide I want to go, to insert country of choice and work with animals in their natural habitats, because I'm not exactly a real people person. I go to wherever, first as a tourist, then I kind of explore just to see, what would it take to get this type of job, to get in this organization. And, then you apply for the visa. Might, be a little costly. In fact, I may actually just research that when I'm not talking to a camera. But, anyhow, going after, okay, that's all shit. That's just all fucking noise. But, anyhow, if you're an immigrant somewhere, keep your documentation up to date and you'll avoid this problem. And don't do anything stupid while you're here. I'll talk to you.